Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Depending on where you are in the world, welcome to episode number 18 of the Unboxing AI webinar series by CARPL. Every Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, for those of us lucky to be in California. And uh, Today we have Dr. Avi Sharma. He's become a close friend over the past, I think, couple of years. And Yeah, but before I proceed, in case you don't know who we are, this is CARPL.ai. CARPL is your friendly neighborhood AI platform, allows you to build, test, deploy, and monitor any kind of radiology AI solutions in the clinical workflows. We are today the only FDA-approved AI marketplace of our kind. I don't know, Avi, if you know that. Uh, and We are today the world's largest AI marketplace in terms of number of apps. We have about 128 now as of last count. We recently onboarded United Imaging as a AI provider. That was a very, very big deal for us. And OEM, the fourth largest in the world, coming on board after GE, Philips, Siemens. Hopefully the big three follow suit. We'll see. But yes, so that's what we do. If you need any kind of AI ever in your workflows, get in touch with us and we'll figure out a way of getting it in there. So yes, seamless self-promotion aside, uh, Avi, thank you for doing this. I have your intro here. Um, Avi, even though he looks very, very young and maybe is the clinical director of AI and is a assistant professor of radiology at the Jefferson Einstein Hospitals in Philly, but manages to work out of lovely San Diego. So I'm sure we'll talk about that. He leverages his clinical expertise to spearhead the implementation of over 30 cutting-edge AI solutions from more than a dozen companies in the radiology domain. So, at CARPL, we study the AI ecosystem like anything. And I think Jefferson Einstein is possibly the hospital with the most AI in the world today, at least that what we've come across. Coming back to Adi, his training includes a residency at Rush in radiology at Rush University, a fellowship in body MR at Stanford, and also an imaging informatics fellowship from the prestigious University of Maryland Medical Center, which has, I think, produced some of the leaders in informatics globally. Beyond his primary role, he actively drives the evolution of medical technology and patient care, and also advises emerging companies in the radiology AI space. Thank you, Avi, for doing this.
Of course. Thank you again, Vidar, for the kind introduction, and thank you to the CARPL team for having me today. I'm excited to chat.
It's our honor. It's our pleasure. So, Avi, who is the clinical director of AI at an academic teaching hospital? What does he or she or they do?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's a little bit of a story behind it. So as I was coming out of training, I knew between my expertise in training within imaging informatics and body MRI, I knew that I wanted to incorporate in some way or form this into my day-to-day role.
So, Avi, sorry, I'm going to cut you there. So you went from residency to informatics to body imaging. How does that happen? Like, why not stop at informatics? Why not stop at residency? Why not go directly to body? Like, what were you thinking at that time? Like, can you walk us through that? And then, of course, the clinical director.
Yeah, of course. Well, so the role of informatics has been a part of my journey since the get-go. Since medical school, I was involved in the medical informatics space. And informatics at large, the concept of it in general is the integration of technology into medicine, pure and simple. So previously, the conversation was, how do we integrate technology into medicine in the EMR world? Epic was new and novel. People didn't like the idea of going from paper charts to electronic records, but we knew, by the government, that it was mandated for us to do so. But ultimately, it was ushering that era and convincing others that, this is the way. and this is where we should eventually go for better patient care. So informatics as a concept was already fascinating to me. And as you might expect, I'm a technology-driven guy. It wasn't very hard for me to find radiology, as arguably, and granted, I am biased, radiology is the most tech-forward specialty with the cutting advancements we've had with MRI and even AI nowadays. It was obviously a great fit for me. So keeping informatics in the back of my head and eventually going to radiology, Sim came along, and that I'd like to give them a big plug because that was an ability for me to find like-minded folks and start learning about different roles that people have in day-to-day practice. And lo and behold, people were splitting their time, not just practicing clinically, but also forging on ahead, creating informatics projects and puzzle pieces. And again, it's all about the integration of technology. So it's a never-ending battle. So with that context in mind, I was very cognizant of finding places where I fit. And as you might expect, Stanford was a great fit. Obviously with Amy, it was great to see that they had built their own center for folks to then do more AI in medicine. And what that meant is that they created an incubator space for programmers and machine learning engineers to meet with clinicians to then build projects out. So naturally going there for fellowship, it was a privilege and it was an honor just to be in the same space as a bunch of brilliant people to start creating and fostering new ideas. And with that, we were in the era of COVID. So doing the remote virtual fellowship was then possible and normalized. So to be able to do the imaging informatics fellowship at University of Maryland, again, it's just a matter of gathering like-minded people. And when you have folks like Dr. Elliot Siegel and others who you can just listen to them talk on and on, hearing about their wisdom and experiences, it was a great fit for me to sort of learn about, their experiences because history repeats itself and it's just learning about what I would want to do. And the culmination of all of those different stories eventually brought to me of understanding that, okay, I want to incorporate AI into my day-to-day job. And then I was very vested in figuring that out.
So what is so still like tell me what is the JD of a clinical director of AI? Like what does that what does your day look like? You know,
Yeah,
doing like
it's
normal
it's a great question.
days. Yeah.
So I'll give more context as to how eventually we created this director of AI role, myself and Dr. Ryan Lee from Jefferson Einstein. So as I was on my job search journey, I talked to many different practice settings, whether it's private practice, academic environments. And from the get-go, I made it very clear that, hey, this is my background and expertise, and I would like to do this in a day-to-day way, and I'd like to integrate AI into daily practice.
Hmm.
Now, that was a very, very tough conversation pre-ChatGPT, because not only did I have to teach them about AI and what its potential impact was, but the second fact is that no one was interested in anyone that wasn't just reading full time. And that was tough for me to then pass over because ultimately, and now know this, is that there's a radiologist shortage. There's not enough of us. There's too much imaging volume to even get around our heads, that eventually everyone is desperate for help. So I've had a lot of tough conversations, but I was resolute in the fact that I wanted this position to be made, and eventually I came across Dr. Ryan Lee, and him and I just started chatting it up. And he obviously was already a leader in this space and had already forged partnerships with a lot of different AI vendors and companies. And he understood the big bet that was AI and understood that there's a time and capital investment that's necessary for us to figure out what AI can do for us. Because ultimately, that question is still open-ended. We don't ultimately know the lasting impact of what AI will be. But what he did know and realized is that for him, being the chair, wearing that hat, as well as leading these AI initiatives was impractical. I mean, ultimately, I can't even imagine all the hats he wears, that he realized that at this point, given all the collaborations that they had and the ones that they wanted to do moving forward, it was impossible for him to handle it all. So him and I together forged a new role of director of AI. So part of my role, I do read clinically, so I'm a hybrid role, but my AI time is primarily spent working with the vendors, curating, identifying new opportunities to work with AI companies, And ultimately, the way I do it in our framework is just really thinking about the imaging life cycle, from ordering exam, scheduling it, to the acquisition of said images, the interpretation of the exam, reporting, and the follow-up. And
Mhm.
as you might expect, there's so many spokes on that wheel that there's an opportunity for AI to make an impact. So we're very open-ended on seeing what there could be a potential opportunity to make an impact. Ultimately, we don't know the question going into it, and that's sort of the journey that we are very transparent with whomever we collaborate with, is that you're looking for clinical feedback to prove, have proof of concept that your company works. And for us, we are loud and proud of sharing stories and journeys that we've had that there has been an impact. So that's one facet of it. I'm working with the vendors, and of course, our IT, PACS, and security team. That's a whole other ball game that requires, of course, the necessary process and framework, ensuring that everything's done in a very finite security forward way, as well as ensuring the protection of PHI. And then I work with our radiologists. Now, a larger part of my job, which I now know is, again, in the world of informatics, is with any new technology, there's always going to be different folks that are embracing new technology, and there's those that are adamantly against it. And then there's like a middle 50% that I work with quite often about, bringing the horse to the well and just having them drink the water and just giving them all the different resources that I can to have them give it a go, and then from there see if it ends up sticking.
So, Avi, what is like, that's very interesting, that obviously there's the early adopters and then there's the laggards, right? Or the innovators and the laggards, as they say, right? And then there's the maybe much more than the 50% in the middle. Uh, can you share like some interesting anecdote, some interesting story of where like you took the horse to the water and it lapped it up like anything, and also the opposite end, right, where you just kept uh yeah, kept trying to take them to the water and nobody drank it.
Yeah, and I'll start with that because ultimately, when I bring on any new tool, there's a lot of folks that are very excited about the potential impact it can make. And to me, it feels like a no-brainer. And I know, again, I'm biased in the fact that I'll embrace any new technology,
Yeah.
that there's just going to be some personalities and people that have done things a certain way for decades. And ultimately, no matter how much information I throw at them, when they've done it well for so many years, why would I try and convince them otherwise? And ultimately, that was sort of a learning opportunity for me to understand that we're never going to have 100% compliance with any AI solution we bring on board, and that's okay. But it's those that are using it, it's just optimizing and making sure they're using it well. And
So
don't
when
get
you
me
say
wrong,
compliance, Avi, when you say compliance, you mean like utilization?
yes, utilization. Exactly. So the utilization percentage, again, we try to trend 50% plus, aim for 80% plus, but now accepting the fact that, I mean, I know brilliant radiologists that have done, again, things a certain way, and the idea of creating a new workflow for them, I think that in itself, it's akin to others, eventually migrating to any new technology, right? We go from gas-powered vehicles to electric vehicles. We go from smartphones, from the flip phones to the Blackberries to the smartphones that we have now. It's just, it takes time, and maybe eventually they'll be convinced, but accepting the fact that it won't be perfect, that was a learning for me. But as far as wins that I've had, one thing I'll say is that radiologists are data driven people. I mean, to be a physician in general, you're a type A person, you like to do things in a certain way, and you need proof in the pudding, and data is ultimately what you need. So a lot of what I also do is looking at our engagement metrics with a lot of these solutions, because I then leverage the data of those who embrace the solution right away and those that didn't, and look at their pre-data and their post-data with using the solution. So an example that was a very positive impact for us was a generative AI automated impression tool. So
Hmm.
I have data in which I had radiologists that picked up the tool right away, and I had some that just saw the little icon on their desktop and made no sense of it. Well, eventually I started looking at the data closer, and we had one of our rock star radiologists using the tool, and they hadn't used it for the first couple months that it was there. but then eventually they did start using it. And what was great is that using the data of one of your colleagues, I think, is most valuable. You can read all the literature in the world, but the person that's in the trenches with you, that knows your day-to-day workflow, is the person that you will take their advice the most. So using their data, I was able to make, pretty significant, impressive data statistics where I was saying, okay, they've had a 20% reduction in turnaround time, reporting time, their efficiency and the words dictated. Ultimately, those numbers went a long way, right? Because if they already viewed this person so favorably years back, I mean, this is just another tool. The toolbox to say, if you want to be more like this radiologist, these are the things that they're doing. And that ultimately created a positive feedback loop for other radiologists to jump on.
Interesting. So just double clicking on the data aspect. So is it hard data, or is a testimonial from a colleague, or just, an informal conversation from a colleague also sufficient?
That's a good question. I mean, ultimately, this data I share at our monthly staff meetings.
Ah,
So the testimonials there, right? They're there. They can speak to it themselves, and they can chat out loud and say, okay, this is my experience with it. But I think that doesn't work for everyone. I mean, there are some folks that just are saying like, yeah, it's nice. I'm glad it works for them. But the data metrics component of it, I mean, again, it's just you need the data behind the words to convince some folks, and that goes a long way. And it's part of my duties to have that data, so it's something I look at often.
interesting. So that's a pretty cool takeaway, that, you know, if I'm going to be deploying an AI solution at a hospital, and if at all I have, the privilege of having users from that hospital, it's much more effective to give that data than a peer-reviewed publication from a, top academic medical institute that nobody relates to
Right.
anyways. That's pretty insightful. Oh, cool. So Avi, switching gears a little bit, and now I go back into the shameless self-promotion mode. We, we're very soon going live at Jefferson Einstein, and been very excited about it. Of course, working with Dr. Lee and yourself and the rest of the team is just phenomenal. And one of the use cases that we're starting off is this whole monitoring of currently deployed AI. So just your thoughts on since you're somebody who studies this, um, is there an easy way to monitor AI? Like, and like this is like outside of CARPL in general, but what is the role of monitoring of AI in general? Like, what does it mean to you as somebody whose job it is to make sure, people are using this stuff?
It's a great question, and I think it also goes back to just having the data and being able to look under the hood. And that's ultimately where I tend to butt heads with vendors, because ultimately people are very prideful about what's happening behind the scenes and are less vocal about sharing all of their potential gaps and limitations and areas to improve, because ultimately they are a company that are trying to put out the best product, and any negative energy isn't ideal for them. But it's so vital because monitoring is necessary for AI models in general. So you know this well. Data drift is very much an issue. And for those that don't know, data drift is referring to the fact that AI models that are trained on a certain cohort of data operate in certain parameters. However, the generalizability and deploying a model in different institutions and practices creates an environment where they may not function as well as they did day one. And that's ultimately a part of the fact that, there's new patient demographics and characteristics, or potentially external factors, say scanners, techniques that are used that could be impacting how the solution operates. Ultimately, I know this phenomena exists, and I know a lot of work is being done by the vendors to mitigate this. Now, where it comes to now is that people are now demanding that transparency. I mean, there's organizational initiatives, namely ACR, the Arch AI initiative, that's exactly trying to tackle this. And it's partly what you guys do at CARPL, is that ultimately knowing this phenomenon exists allows me to get ahead of it before a small problem becomes a bigger one. And it's identifying the potential scanners or parameters that are causing a model to not function at its optimal state. Because ultimately, once the solution is embedded into the workflow and has proven its worth and has been reliable in the past, those that are unfamiliar with this risk will ultimately defer and have a tendency of automation bias, which is a component of just any AI tool, in relying on the results, even though they may be artifactual. And
Yeah.
so to answer, I mean, ultimately the monitoring component, it's necessary because these models, as you know now, are fixed by the FDA, and retraining them and allowing them to then be fine-tuned so that they work consistently, that is not yet common practice. So it behooves us more to have the ability to look under the hood and monitor these solutions.
Yeah, no, and at least in our experience, Avi, the call that we have taken of being, vendor neutral, goes back to, what you were saying initially, wherein, if you've built an AI solution, it's essentially akin to your own child, right? And nobody wants to call their own child ugly. And but when other people's lives depend on your child, it's important to kind of turn on that light and see what reality is. And we like our aspiration is to be that light, in a sense. And interestingly, now we are also able to do what we call fourth party AI monitoring, like, AI that's not through CARPL, but still we're able to kind of, parse through secondary captures and stuff like that, and do that monitoring component. We do have a question that's come in from Ashish. Ashish is an AI enthusiast here in New Delhi itself. He's a good friend. He asks, question on radiomics. Radiomics is becoming increasingly important, especially in cancer imaging. Would love to hear your thoughts on it.
It's a great thought, and radiomics is definitely in the bucket of it's 1 year away from being 1 year away, in which the concept of radiomics is so exciting in the research setting, but ultimately I don't know if we're all the way there when it comes to proving having a consistent model that's able to make pretty impressive, diagnostic and prognostic considerations. It's happening, and I do think it's moving a little bit slower, and ultimately it's because it's a pretty tall task, right? Ultimately seeing things the human eye can't see and making diagnostic predictions from it's exciting, and it's going to be the future, and I have no reservation in expecting that we will get there and radiomics will be commonplace. But in my mind, it's like, stop shooting for the stars, but rather land in the clouds and finding more practical AI solutions that just help with our workflow aspect of it all, rather than trying to bite the whole pie and try to solve radiology imaging on a larger scale rather than focusing on smaller, more practical tasks.
Tell me, like, have you come across, like, of course, none of them are clinical, but have you come across like some of these crazy radiogenomics models where, you can get like BRCA or BRCA status from an MR and like EGFR from a CT and stuff like that? Like, uh, do you
Yeah, so I have come across it, and again, it falls into that role of, okay, these are pretty bold predictions that you're making off, again, a data set that's probably coming from a local institution on a local data set, and the whole generalizability aspect of it comes into question, and can this work at scale? That's ultimately the largest question
Yeah.
that's tough to answer, and until you get the perfect heterogeneous data set that's widely globally available that can make an appropriate prediction, I don't know how valuable that information is. And it's diagnostic implication, right? So prognostically, the decision to whether to treat a cancer or not treat a cancer and how aggressively it's going to grow, it's kind of it's a little ambiguous yet. I'm not fully confident, but we're getting there.
Nice. No, and the second question is more of a philosophical question on what does it mean to be a radiologist in the AI era. I think essentially, I read through the question. Essentially, somewhat of automation bias, right? While autopilot has made air travel better and more efficient and safer compared to complete manual flying, if 90% of flying time is autopilot, do the pilot's flying skills a trophy over time? And I think, similar kind of analogies are being made. Would love to know from your experience of using the 30, algorithms.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it speaks to just the concept of AI in general and the potential impact it's making across all different facets of life, not just medicine in general. Radiology, I think, obviously becomes in the middle of the scope because of the fact that it's pixel based, or our work can be automated in more aspects than others. But the way I approach it, and it's a good question because you're ultimately asking, okay, the pilot are they as skilled of a pilot now because they're not flying 100% of the time? But you do know the pilot is there because in those, hopefully never occurred scenario, they're there to take over and they have the skills to then do said task should the AI fail. And in the same way, AI in its current state is an adjunct tool to a radiologist. By no means is any AI solution completely independent and doesn't require a radiologist to bless whatever output they've created, because ultimately the radiologist is the final signer. And I think that opens up a whole conversation about the medical legal aspects of it all, and ultimately the liability that could come into question, say things were to become more independent. But ultimately, when you ask the question, you're ultimately asking, this is a very dynamic time of AI in radiology.
Yep.
In my mind, I'm obviously early career radiologist, and I'm very vested in how this shapes out because I have decades of being a radiologist ahead of me. And to me, the best way I can help my fellow partner in arms is to educating them about the limitations of AI, and for them to then understand where it can potentially fail so that they can circumvent those scenarios and never be in an opportunity where, automation bias got the best of me and I let something through that shouldn't have. And that's why another educational aspect of it all is what we do at Jefferson Einstein is educating our trainees, our residents. We have a monthly AI curriculum where we educate our radiologists about exactly all of these exactly fundamental concepts: machine learning, deep learning, bias aspect of it all. There's an ethical component to it. There's a bias component to it. And I'm not asking these people to then be luminaries in the field. I'm simply asking them to have a knowledge base to then go into whatever practice setting they may go into, private or academic, so that when their practice eventually do jump into the water of AI, you have some people on site that can help navigate that process.
Oh, that's pretty comprehensive. Uh, you know, you should write that down, make a process flow out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Just final thoughts, Avi, as we approach time. You mentioned that you work with startups as well, helping them out with, clinical product and stuff like that. What uh, if there are radiologists out there who want to do similar stuff, like how does that work? Like how can they get started on working with AI startups? Like how do they find these guys? What are the structures? Do they how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and ultimately leveraging organizations that get like-minded people together, whether it's SIM or RSNA or HIMSS. A lot of these organizations pull people from all over the world that come together to then be in a large exhibition hall so people can walk the hall spaces and talk to people. And honestly, it's about keeping an open mind because you're going to see quite a lot of different companies and a lot of novel ideas. And, there are times where they'll be there one year and they won't be there the next. But that's how these conversations start. You start chatting with people, understanding their background. And ultimately, I think it's crucial because I think there's not a lot of crosstalk that happens between the developers of said AI solutions and the end user clinicians that use the product. There's a knowledge gap there where I don't think developers early on incorporate clinicians who understand what is missing in their day-to-day workflow. And likewise, it's radiologists understanding, okay, what needs to happen to make this a reality. And that sort of crosstalk to me, again, or these conferences went a long way in me meeting a lot of folks just like you guys, and we got to talking, and you guys were tackling the monitoring question, and that was something that was up top of mind for us, given the multitude of solutions we had, and the ability to manage and monitor them all is no easy task. So, to all new developers, I think I'll say this is that you see these articles coming out all the time about new FDA cleared solutions, but understanding that finding your unique moat and finding the place where you can bring something to the table that hasn't been offered before. I think we're now in this era where things are getting saturated in some use cases. So it's a matter of proving yourself as unique to one to the other, because ultimately the performance question is becoming less of a concern. I think it becomes a little bit less, it becomes a little bit more negligible, right? I mean, everyone's high performing, and to be 0.5% or 1% better than the other, I think ultimately in your vacuum, sure, that was meaningful for you, but in the grand scale of things, you're just hoping that your product is more easily deployed and easier to use. There's a user interface aspect of it all that also should be prioritized.
No, that's awesome. I think that's a beautiful note to end on. If you're building AI, it's more important for your product to be easy to use than the best performing. Uh, Difficult thing to accept, but true.
Yeah,
So with that, thanks, Avi, and thank you to everybody who joined. This is going to be on YouTube, and see you next week.
yeah. Thanks, Kadir. Again, thanks to the CARPL team. See you.
Uh,